grew up in on the quiet edge of Fairfax County, Virginia. My parents passed a few years apart, and after the divorce papers were signed, the idea of a silent, familiar place sounded better than any apartment downtown. So here I am. One-story brick ranch, creaky hardwood floors, the same oak tree in the front yard that used to hold my tire swing. I work from home now, field technician for a telecom company, mostly remote diagnostics and the occasional service call. The days blur together. Coffee, laptop, headset, the low hum of routers in my ear, and nights that stretch too long. I never really knew the woman who lived on the other side of the low wooden fence. Leona. 38, maybe 39. A painter, people said. She moved in 3 years ago, kept to herself, curtains drawn by dusk. I'd seen her a handful of times. Watering plants at odd hours, carrying grocery bags up the front steps alone, always in oversized sweaters even when the weather didn't call for it. She never waved first, and I never forced it. We were two quiet houses separated by a strip of grass and a fence that had started to rot in places. That all changed on an October night when the temperature dropped hard and the moon hung full and low. I'd been awake past 1, scrolling through nothing on my phone, the blue light burning the back of my eyes. Sleep hadn't come easy since the divorce. Some nights it felt like my brain refused to power down. Around 1:47 a.m. I heard it. A sharp, brittle crack, like glass giving up. Not loud enough to be a car accident, not soft enough to ignore. It came from the left, from Leona's side of the fence. I sat up, heart already kicking a little harder than it should. The logical part of me said, go back to bed. People drop things all the time. But something pulled me to the window anyway. I pushed the curtain aside and looked out. Her porch light was on, a weak yellow bulb that barely reached the steps. The front door stood open, maybe 6 inches, which was wrong. In all the time she'd lived there, I had never once seen that door anything but shut and locked by sunset. A faint glow spilled from inside the house onto the wooden planks, and in that glow, I saw the reflection of shattered glass catching moonlight like scattered ice. I was pulling on jeans and boots before I could talk myself out of it. The air outside bit cold. Leaves skittered across the lawn as I crossed my yard and followed the fence line, boots quiet on the grass. When I reached the gap where the boards had warped apart years ago, I slipped through without thinking. The closer I got, the slower I moved. I didn't want to scare her. I didn't know what I was walking into. And then I saw her. Leona was sitting on the top step of her porch, knees drawn to her chest, barefoot. A broken coffee mug lay in pieces near her feet, dark liquid seeping into the wood. The porch light painted everything in bruised colors, and the moon turned the edges silver. Her left hand rested limply in her lap, palm up, and across the inside of her wrist ran a thin, deliberate line of red. Not deep, not life-threatening, but deliberate enough that the sight of it knocked the air out of me. She didn't look up when my boots crunched on the gravel path. She just spoke, soft and flat, like someone talking in their sleep. You shouldn't have seen that. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't plead. It was the voice of someone who had already decided the world wouldn't change its mind about her. I stopped a few feet away, hands open at my side so she could see I wasn't a threat. My pulse hammered in my throat, but I forced it slow. The night smelled like wood smoke and damp leaves and something metallic underneath. I took one more step, close enough now to see the exhaustion carved under her eyes, the way her hair had come loose from its tie and hung in dark strands across her cheek. She still wouldn't look at me. I shrugged out of the old canvas jacket I'd grabbed on my way out, the one that still smelled faintly of the garage where I sometimes tinkered with my dad's old tools. Without asking, I draped it over her shoulders. She flinched, just a little, but didn't pull away. My voice came out quieter than I expected. If you didn't want me to see that, then why did you leave the door open? For a long time, she didn't answer. The only sound was the wind moving through the oaks and the slow drip of coffee from the broken mug. Then her shoulders rose and fell once, a breath that seemed to take everything she had left. She finally lifted her head. Her eyes, green and bloodshot, met mine for the first time that night. And in that look, I saw something I wasn't prepared for. Not shame, not fear of being caught, but a kind of exhausted surrender. Like she had left the door open on purpose. Like some part of her had been waiting, hoping someone would walk through it before it was too late. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. I stepped closer, sat on the cold wood beside her, close enough that the sleeve of my jacket brushed her arm, but not so close that she felt crowded. Blood still beaded along the cut, slow and dark. I pulled the sleeve of my t-shirt down over my hand and pressed it gently against the wound. She let me. We stayed like that. Two strangers on a porch in the middle of the night, the moon watching us like it already knew how the story would end. I helped her inside. The porch light stayed on behind us, throwing a long rectangle of yellow across the floorboards as I closed the door with my foot. Leona moved like someone walking underwater, slow, careful, as if the air itself might bruise her. I kept one hand lightly at her elbow, ready to steady her if she swayed. She didn't pull away. Her living room smelled faintly of turpentine and the sharp sweetness of drying paint. Canvases leaned against every wall, some half-finished, some blank. A single lamp with a crooked shade cast a warm, uneven glow. I guided her to the kitchen, past the small dining table cluttered with brushes and jars of murky water. The broken mug on the porch would have to wait. "Sit," I said softly, pulling out a wooden chair. She sank into it without protest. I found a clean dish towel in the first drawer I opened, ran it under cold water, and pressed it gently over the cut. She watched my hands instead of my face. "You don't have to do this," she murmured. "I know." I kept the pressure steady. The bleeding had already slowed to a sluggish seep. When I was sure it wouldn't start again, I wrapped the towel around her wrist and tied it with the calm I used to use on frayed fiber optic cables. Firm, but not tight. She exhaled, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than lungs. "I'll make tea," I said. "Ginger?" A tiny nod. I found an electric kettle on the counter, filled it, clicked it on. While it heated, I located mugs, a jar of honey, a box of ginger tea bags that looked like they'd been there since last winter. The ordinary motions felt strangely intimate, like I'd stepped into a life that wasn't mine but somehow fit anyway. When I set the steaming mug in front of her, she wrapped both hands around it as if the warmth might slip away. We sat in silence for a long minute. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. "I owe you an explanation," she finally said, voice raw. "You don't owe me anything." She looked at me then, really looked, and whatever she saw made the corner of her mouth twitch in something that wasn't quite a smile. "He never hit me," she began, eyes on the steam curling from her cup. "Not once. People always think that's the worst part, the part that leaves marks. But the worst part was the way he watched, all the time. Even when he was in another room, I could feel it, like living under a microscope I couldn't crawl out of." I stayed quiet, letting her words settle between us. "He decided what I wore, what I painted, who I talked to. If I laughed too loud at something on TV, he'd pause it and ask why it was funny. If I was quiet, he wanted to know what I was thinking. Every minute had to be accounted for. He called it love. I called it breathing with permission." The kettle clicked off in the background, but neither of us moved. "I stayed 9 years, she said, almost surprised at the number herself. 9 years of shrinking. Then one morning I woke up and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a thought that was completely mine. So I left. Packed 2 bags while he was at work, took the car, drove until the tank was almost empty, and kept going. Changed my name on the lease here, blocked every number I could think of. Thought distance would fix it." She lifted the mug, sipped, winced at the heat. "It didn't. The watching stopped, but the feeling never did. Some nights I still check the windows twice. Some nights I can't sleep because the quiet feels like punishment." Her gaze drifted to the towel around her wrist. Tonight was the first time in 3 years I let myself think maybe the quiet won. That maybe I didn't deserve to be here anymore. I felt the words land heavy in my chest. My own divorce suddenly felt small, petty, a paperwork problem compared to this. "But you opened the door," I said, echoing what I'd said outside. "You left it open." She looked up, eyes glassy but steady. I think part of me hoped someone would notice I was drowning before I went under all the way. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything she hadn't said yet and everything I didn't know how to answer. I reached across the table slow enough that she could pull away if she wanted. She didn't. I rested my hand over both of hers, still clutching the mug. "I'm not good at fixing people," I said. "God knows I couldn't fix my own marriage, but I'm pretty good at staying." If you want me to stay tonight, I will. No questions, no advice, just here. Her fingers tightened under mine almost imperceptibly. I don't want to be alone, she whispered. Then you won't be. She let out a breath that trembled at the edges, and for the first time since I'd stepped onto her porch, the tension in her shoulders eased a fraction. We moved to the living room. I took the couch. She took the armchair, knees pulled up again, the dish towel still wrapped around her wrist. I stayed awake long after her breathing evened out into sleep, watching the rise and fall of the jacket I'd draped over her earlier. The lamp painted soft gold across her face, and in that light the exhaustion looked less like defeat and more like someone who'd been carrying something too heavy for too long. At some point I must have dozed off sitting up because when I opened my eyes the room was pale with early dawn and she was watching me. Not wary anymore, just curious. You meant it, she said quietly. About staying. I did. She studied me for a long moment, something new flickering behind her eyes, something dangerously close to trust. I don't know what this is, she said. Me neither. But I think I want to find out. I felt the corner of my mouth lift, the first real smile I'd managed in months. Then we'll take it one night at a time. The days after that night didn't bring any grand declarations. No sweeping gestures, no promises under the stars, just small, deliberate overlaps in two lives that had been running parallel for years. I started noticing her routines the way you notice the weather changing. She watered her herbs every morning at 7:30, always in the same faded blue robe, hair twisted up with a paintbrush. I'd be on my back porch with coffee, pretending to check emails on my phone, but really watching the way she bent to pinch dead leaves, the careful tilt of the watering can. Sometimes she'd glance over, catch me looking, and lift a hand in a half wave that felt like a secret. We fell into a rhythm without planning it. I'd mow my lawn on Saturdays, she'd come out to sweep her walkway at the same time. I'd find excuses to cross the fence line, a loose board that needed nailing, a package misdelivered to my porch that was actually hers. She'd thank me with a quiet, appreciate it, and a look that lingered a second longer than necessary. One afternoon I was up on a ladder fixing the gutter that had pulled away from her eaves, something I'd noticed weeks ago but finally had the nerve to offer. She stood below, holding the ladder steady, sleeves rolled to her elbows. The scar on her wrist had scabbed over, a thin pink line against pale skin. You don't have to keep doing this, she called up. I know. Then why? I hammered the last bracket into place before answering. Because it needs doing. And because I like knowing you're not handling everything alone. She didn't respond, but when I climbed down, she handed me a glass of iced tea without being asked. Our fingers brushed. Neither of us moved away. The conversations grew longer, deeper, but always in safe territory at first. The best local coffee? The way the oaks dropped acorns like warnings every fall. Her latest commission for a children's book illustration. She talked about color theory the way some people talk about religion. Quiet passion, hands moving as she described mixing cerulean with burnt umber to get the exact shade of dusk. I told her about the satisfaction of tracing a fiber line through 3 counties to find the one splice that was dropping packets. She listened like it mattered. But underneath every exchange ran the current of what we weren't saying. I caught myself replaying that first night over and over, the blood, the open door, the way she'd looked at me like I might disappear if she blinked. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was helping or just inserting myself into a wound that wasn't mine to heal. My ex-wife's voice echoed sometimes. You always think you can fix things, Jake. People aren't routers. Leona wasn't much better. I'd see it in the way she'd suddenly go still mid-sentence, eyes flicking to the street as if expecting a car that never came, or how she'd pull her sleeve down when she thought I was looking at her wrist. Once, when I reached to take a paintbrush from her hand, she flinched so hard she dropped it. Sorry, she muttered, bending to pick it up. Old habit. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to apologize for surviving, but the words stuck. The tension broke on a Thursday evening in late October. I'd been at my desk all day, untangling a mess of misconfigured VLANs for a client who kept yelling about downtime. By 6, I was fried, head pounding, the kind of tired that sits behind your eyes. I stepped outside for air and found her on her porch steps again, same as that first night, but this time with a sketchbook open on her lap and no light except the moon. She didn't look up when my boots hit the gravel. Bad day? I asked. Long one. I sat beside her, leaving a careful foot of space. The sketchbook showed a half-finished drawing of the fence between our houses, but the boards were warped into impossible shapes, like they were melting. You okay? She closed the book. Do you ever feel like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop? All the time. She turned to face me then, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them. I keep waiting for you to realize this is too much. The baggage, the nights I can't sleep, the way I still check the locks 3 times before bed. You'll see it's not worth it and you'll stop coming around. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. I thought about my ex, about the way I'd stayed too long in a marriage that had gone cold because leaving felt like failure, about how I'd promised myself I'd never again confuse staying with loving. I'm not here because I think you need saving, I said. I'm here because when I'm with you, the noise in my head quiets down. Because you look at me like I'm not just the guy who fixes cables. Because the idea of not seeing you tomorrow feels worse than any bad day at work. She searched my face, looking for the lie. You're not afraid of someone like me? Define someone like you. Damaged. I shook my head. I'm divorced at 30. I live in my dead parents' house. I flinch when my phone rings because it might be my ex's lawyer. We're both a little damaged, Leona. She let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Then why does it feel like you're the one holding me together? Because maybe we're both tired of falling apart alone. The space between us shrank. I reached out slow enough for her to stop me and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She leaned into the touch just barely. I'm not going anywhere, I said. Not unless you tell me to. She studied me for a long moment, then rested her forehead against my shoulder. I felt the warmth of her through my shirt, the slight tremble she was trying to hide. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Me neither. But we've got time to figure it out. We stayed like that until the moon climbed higher and the air turned sharp enough to bite. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were clearer than I'd ever seen them. Stay for dinner? She asked. I smiled. Only if you let me do the dishes. November came in with rain that wouldn't quit. It drummed on the roof like impatient fingers, blurred the streetlights into soft halos, and turned the fence between our houses into a dark, wet spine. I was on the couch pretending to watch a game I didn't care about when the knock came. 3 quiet taps, almost lost under the downpour. I opened the door, and there she was. Leona stood on my porch, soaked through, hair plastered to her cheeks, an old canvas coat doing nothing against the weather. Water dripped from her eyelashes. She didn't have an umbrella. She didn't have anything in her hands at all. I don't want to end tonight alone, she said. Just that. No apology for the hour, no explanation. I stepped aside. She crossed the threshold, leaving small puddles on the mat. I closed the door against the storm and the rest of the world. She stood in the middle of my living room like she wasn't sure the floor would hold her. I took the coat from her shoulders. It weighed twice what it should. Underneath, she wore a thin gray sweater and jeans, both clinging cold to her skin. I disappeared long enough to grab a towel and one of my old flannel shirts. When I came back, she hadn't moved. Here, I said, holding them out. She dried her face, then pulled the flannel on without a word. It hung loose on her, sleeves past her fingertips. She rolled them once, twice, until the scar on her left wrist showed, pale and unmistakable in the lamplight. She didn't try to hide it. I led her to the wide bay window at the front of the house, the one with the cushioned bench my mom used to read on. We sat side by side, knees almost touching, watching rain streak the glass. The only light came from the street lamp outside and the low glow of the lamp behind us. The room smelled like wood smoke from the fireplace I'd lit earlier, and the faint trace of turpentine that always seemed to follow her. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. Neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It had weight, yes, but the kind that holds you steady instead of crushing you. She broke it first. I used to be terrified of quiet, she said, voice low. In the old house, quiet meant he was listening for me to make a mistake. Now I'm terrified of noise because it reminds me how loud everything used to feel inside my head. I turned to look at her. Rainwater still clung to the ends of her hair, catching the light like tiny prisms. I was afraid of silence too, I said. After Sarah left, the house sounded wrong. Every creak was proof I'd failed. But when I sit with you, the quiet doesn't feel like failure. It feels like breathing room. She shifted, angling her body toward me. The flannel gaped at the collar. I could see the sharp line of her collarbone, the faint scatter of freckles I'd never been close enough to notice before. I spent years learning how to make myself small, she said. How to disappear inside my own skin so no one would look too hard. And then you looked anyway, not to find flaws, just to see me. Her hand moved slow, deliberate, until her fingertips rested on my knee. I covered them with mine. I'm still scared, she whispered. Scared this is pity dressed up as something else. Scared you'll wake up one day and realize I'm more work than I'm worth. I shook my head. I'm scared too. Scared I'll say the wrong thing and send you back behind those curtains. Scared I'll care too much and not enough at the same time. But I'm more scared of pretending I don't feel this. Her eyes searched mine, close enough now that I could see the flecks of gold near the center. I don't want to hide anymore, she said. Not from you. She lifted her left hand, the one with the scar, and turned it palm up between us. Then, without looking away, she pushed the sleeve higher, past the elbow, exposing the faint silver lines that time hadn't quite erased. If I stop hiding the worst parts, she said, voice trembling only a little, do I still get to stay? I brought her wrist to my lips and pressed a kiss to the scar, soft, deliberate, like sealing a promise. You never had to hide them from me. Something broke open in her face, not tears, but relief so sharp it looked like pain. She leaned forward until her forehead rested against mine. I want to be close to you, she breathed. Not careful, just close. I cupped her face, thumbs brushing the rain-cold skin of her cheeks. When our lips met, it wasn't fireworks or thunder. It was the quiet click of two things finally fitting after being forced apart for years. Slow, deliberate, tasting of rainwater and ginger tea and the salt of skin that had carried too much for too long. She sighed into the kiss, a sound that felt like surrender and beginning all at once. Her hand slid under my shirt, palms flat against my back, grounding herself. I pulled her closer until she was half in my lap, knees bracketing my hips, the window bench creaking beneath us. We stayed there until the rain softened to a whisper and the lamp behind us burned low. No rush, no need to name it yet. Just breath and heartbeat, and the steady realization that neither of us was turning away. When we finally pulled apart, her eyes were bright, unafraid. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, she said. Me neither. But I know I want it to look like this. I rested my forehead against hers again. Then we'll start there. By the time December rolled in, the threats finally showed up in the mailbox. A plain white envelope, no return address, Leona's name typed in the center. Inside was a single photograph, her sleeping on the couch the night I first stayed over, taken through the living room window. On the back, in neat black ink, you still belong to me. She brought it to my kitchen without a word, laid it on the table between us like a dead thing. Her hands didn't shake, but her face had gone the color of ash. I felt the old anger rise, the kind I hadn't let myself touch since the divorce, but I swallowed it down. She didn't need my rage right now. She needed the part of me that could think straight. We're ending this today, I said. She started to protest, some reflex about handling it alone, but I cut her off gently. Not alone. Not anymore. We installed cameras that same afternoon, 4 of them, motion-triggered, cloud backup. I called a buddy from college who'd gone into law. He met us the next morning with a restraining order packet already half filled out. Leona signed where she was told, fingers steady now. When the deputy came to serve the papers 2 days later, the address on file was an empty rental in Richmond. He was already gone, running again. But the cameras stayed, the locks got upgraded, and for the first time in years, Leona slept through the night without checking the windows. Winter settled hard after that. Frost on the grass every morning, bare branches scratching the sky. She started leaving her curtains open until bedtime. I started leaving my porch light on for her. One Saturday in January, she knocked on my door holding a small poster board and a shy smile. I'm starting a kids' watercolor class next weekend, she said. 6 students, library basement. I need a model for the first session. I raised an eyebrow. You want to paint my face to a room full of 8-year-olds? Not your face. She turned the board around. It was a rough sketch of an open hand, palm up, strong lines, and careful shading. This, the hand that put a jacket on my shoulders and never asked me to pay for it. I stared at the drawing longer than I meant to. I'd be honored. The class was chaos in the best way. Sticky fingers, spilled water cups, kids arguing over who got cerulean. I sat on a stool for 45 minutes while Leona walked them through mixing skin tones and shadows. Every few minutes her eyes would flick to mine across the room, soft, steady, like we were the only two people there. When the session ended and the last parent had collected their sugar high artist, she locked the door behind them and leaned against it. "You were perfect," she said. "I didn't move." That's what made it perfect. Spring came slow that year. The oaks leafed out, the fence got a fresh coat of white paint, this time together, both of us on ladders arguing good-naturedly over brushstrokes. She opened an Etsy shop for her prints. Orders trickled in, then poured. I got promoted to senior field engineer, still mostly remote, but with enough extra pay that I finally fixed the leaky basement window I'd been ignoring since I moved back. We never put a label on it. No big talk about boyfriend-girlfriend, no moving trucks crossing the fence line. Some nights she cooked at her place and carried plates over. Some nights I grilled steaks and she brought wine. We left toothbrushes in each other's bathrooms without ceremony. When one of us couldn't sleep, we'd meet on whichever porch felt right and sit until the dark felt less sharp. One warm night in late May, the air thick with honeysuckle, she showed up at my door holding 2 mugs of chamomile. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I wasn't even trying." She handed me a mug and stepped inside. We ended up on the couch, her feet in my lap, my thumb tracing absent circles on her ankle. "I used to think peace was something you found after everything stopped hurting," she said quietly. "Turns out it's something you build, one ordinary night at a time." I set my mug down, pulled her gently until she was curled against my chest. "I used to think starting over meant leaving everything behind," I said into her hair. "Turns out sometimes it just means letting someone stay." She tilted her head back to look at me, eyes soft in the low light. "From the moment you didn't walk away," she whispered, echoing words I'd said months ago. Everything had already begun. I kissed her then, slow, certain, tasting chamomile and the faint trace of the turpentine that never quite left her skin. Outside, the cicadas were just starting their summer song, and the porch light I still left on for her glowed steady through the window. We weren't fixed. Some nights the past still knocked, but we had learned the sound of each other's footsteps on the gravel, the weight of a hand on a shoulder that asked nothing except presence. And that was enough. More than enough.